Thank you, everyone. It's great to see many familiar faces out in the audience here, and I welcome everyone who's also following online. My name is Dr. Fred Sutherland, and as I was introduced, I will be talking about a fun little discovery we had in downtown Minneapolis last summer. So first, let's establish where we're at. So this is Father Hennepin Bluff Park in Minneapolis, as I said before. I'm going to use my little laser pointer thing here. Thank you, Laura, for telling me how to do that. But Father Hennepin Bluff Park, on the very southern end of this figure here, we have the Stone Arch Bridge. So we're on the St. Anthony side of St. Anthony Falls, what used to be called St. Anthony, or the eastern side of the Mississippi River. And this wedge-shaped park that we have here, this is a probably circa 2022 image because some of the renovations are already in process that you see in this figure that we were doing construction monitoring for. And we've done some previous work for several years, beginning in 2019. Here I am with my little beanie hat out in the cold in the fall, shoveling dirt around Father Hennepin Bluff, trying to identify if there were any surviving features within this park. And then we moved on to the phase 2 evaluation to look more carefully for features. Here I am again in the ground. My man Chris Rico is over here documenting things very nicely. And yeah, we've documented several interesting features. I will give you a little taste of that. Mostly limestone foundations of former commercial buildings along Main Street area. If we go back here, I'm gonna show you, this is Main Street right here. So the main commercial district that we encountered a little bit of features related to were along that stretch. And we'll be talking a little bit more about that specifically coming up here during the monitoring phase. And yeah, these are some shots we took of some of the foundations that were exposed during the monitoring process. I think Laura, you were the photographer. Laura Koski was the principal monitor on this project. I was the alternate who'd come in and cover when other activities were happening and things were busy. But yes, while there were other discoveries and things made, today we're going to talk about a very specific one in what was labeled Area T right here at this intersection. And you can actually see a little dark brownish depression there where they were digging a stormwater drainage basin feature to help improve kind of the trails and walkways around that section of the park. And yeah, we did that last summer in June. And the two features we're going to talk about were side by side. They were in, first of all, as they started to open up this drainage basin with a backhoe, a tree stump was exposed, a tree that wasn't visible on the surface initially. So all we saw was just they plucked out this big tree with roots. I'm like, well, that's interesting. We have a buried tree. And as they started scraping back and moving things along, the next photo here, we saw another limestone foundation slab, the edge of a building, most likely a building foundation. So I told them to halt. We started mapping and documenting everything in. And we said, okay, can this stay in place? Yes, it could. Fantastic. Everything's going swimmingly with the monitoring. Of course, I've got Jeremy on the phone, Jeremy Nienow, my boss. He's racing out there in the truck to go be on the scene and figure out what the discovery was. And as they started digging deeper, which is this third photo here, and I do want to mention right here, we still have that limestone foundation slab right in that corner. Across here, you see this dark lens and then the little bit of roots and light material there. This Midden started dropping out artifacts, ceramics, bottles, animal bone just started rolling out into the bottom of this basin pit. So I had to halt the excavator again and say, hold, wait, we got to look at this here, look a little more carefully. And so we began documenting this Midden feature, which we'll now talk in more detail. It's here in this red circle. Again, we have that limestone foundation slab, and then we have these roots, which helped encase and wrap around this Midden, this trash Midden feature that was next to an old building. And here we have a detail of a teacup, multiple bottles, animal bones, ceramic dishes came out of it. So we collected as much as we safely could. As you can see, this slope is very steep. We didn't want to cause the basin to collapse. So we maybe captured, I estimated about 85–90% of the Midden without causing that sidewall to cave. Here I am, as I like to lovingly say, looking at these animal bones and saying, well, what animal sound did this one make? Because I am not a faunal specialist. And in fact, our faunal specialist, who was the primary monitor, was off that afternoon at an appointment. And so I'm here just collecting as much as I can, knowing, oh shoot, we have this amazing Midden feature with animal bone and everything that can tell us about this moment in time. So then we just had to gather that up and then have her expertise and everyone else's brought to bear on this fun little discovery. And oh no, I have the blue wheel of death. Oh no. Okay. Well, I can just tell some stories too, if this is not gonna, come on. Oh boy. Well, what I was gonna show next was some very beautiful shots of the ceramics all kind of placed around to show that they were 1850s dishware that had maker's marks. The teacup that you can see there didn't have any distinctive markings, but the general form fit the mid-19th century. And after doing some careful analysis and some guides and looking at the maker's names, it fit very tightly to the early 1850s. And knowing that, we looked back in our records and research for that section of the district and found out that it was part of kind of an early Minneapolis, or in this case, St. Anthony, which later became Minneapolis, little boom town called Spooner's Row, sort of anchored at that intersection by Colonel Spooner's building. Oh, did you get it? You got it back up. Fantastic. Well, I'll come back into frame now for our folks on the internet. And we will talk about all those beautiful, beautiful artifacts now that they're all cleaned up and here for you to see. We have some of the dishware. We have the maker's marks that were very distinctive to that period in the 19th century. We have the teacup, a few very nice early molded bottles, and all of the animal bone that was lovingly identified by Laura Koski, our faunal specialist, along with some glassware and drinkware. This general assemblage, I concluded, was probably more of a, maybe not an institutional setting, but a restaurant setting, a place where people could dine and eat and be served food. And that kind of fit the general vibe of the buildings and the commercial structures nearby, which are often hotels and restaurants and things like that for people out of town that were coming through this district early on. For those of you who want the data, I'm sure they're out there. We have our tables here of the faunal assemblage and the diagnostic artifacts. So if you need all the numbers and the types, but one thing I will say, if I hit my little laser pointer, I do want to highlight, we had cattle and identified bison bones or likely bison bones, which was kind of a little bit of an interesting surprise in this faunal assemblage. We assumed, you know, cattle, rib bones, but then all of a sudden they're serving bison in this this restaurant feature, this commercial feature. So isn't that fascinating? So we started to do a little more research regarding Spooner's Row and the role it had. I know some of these are a little bit small to read, but hopefully if you look at this presentation later, you can zoom in on the advertisements about cotillion parties and all sorts of other celebrations and events halls that were going on in this place. So all of these, this is an 1860s map of that Main Street row. Here we have the Andreas 1874 atlas of the same area. We also have a nice little view of Spooner's building. So this would have been right nearby where that Midden was discovered, along with a couple descriptions of all the things that were going on nearby there. Moving on, we have an example of, oh, I'm getting the blue wheel again, everybody. Okay, we may have to start turning on our imaginations again, since I don't know if that slide's gonna pop up again. Ivy, I will just tap out for a second if you want to figure out what's going on, and I will talk about the fact that we did menu research. And I say we, I should actually give Laura Koski some credit on it, finding those historic menus from the mid-19th century from similar commercial buildings around the district. And several of them did indicate that wild game was being served to visitors out there, including bison and bear and venison. So wild game was being brought in and served to visitors, and it fit the tone of some of the stories in the 19th century of travelers coming from either the East Coast or the South and wanting to see what was considered the Western territories, which were then emerging to be Minnesota. And so one of the novelties of coming up here was dining on foods that maybe they don't have access to back east or back south. So bison actually is a kind of a logical thing to kind of be a lure or an enticement to kind of try something exotic and different. So it sort of fit this an interesting story and dynamic of this moment in time in the 1850s when this district was really at its height before it began to decline after the American Civil War. And of course, after that time, oh, you've got it. Okay, thank you. Got the menus. I love it. Okay, sorry. When we found the menu with the buffalo or bison, sorry, Laura, bison. So these are just examples of some other Minneapolis 19th century menus. And I want to call specifically right here the discovery of this one. Here we have buffalo rump and bear and venison. So a lot of this wild game, prairie chicken was also being served in the mid-19th century. So this was part of just a wider thing of local game that was being featured and served to visitors and guests that were coming to this commercial district. And with that, I do want to take a minute for any sort of question and answer we have. Thank you for listening to our little discussion of a fun, I think, archaeological assemblage and the stories associated with it. And I'm sure if you have any questions, I'll be glad to take a couple. Thank you. Yes.
How deep below the surface were the foundation?
Thank you. Just in case others online there couldn't hear, he asked about the depth of those features. They were found directly encased by the roots of that tree that they plucked out, and that was maybe about a meter down or just under 3 feet. So there was other fill material from the creation of the park directly above the tree stump to the ground surface. So that would be like gravels and other mixed fill material. And that tree, I think, helped protect the midden. The tree may have actually preferred going into that midden feature because it was probably softer and trapped moisture in that area and it liked it and thrived. But then it was probably considered a nuisance and in the way. So they cut the tree and buried it as they formed the park in the 20th century. That's my theory, at least. But yes, asking about the deposition and how it formed, that's to my understanding how it happened. Yes. Yes, the majority of the ones encountered in the park were these limestone foundations to other similar buildings that were part of that district. In many cases, there was not a really clear picture of what each building had been for. So that's why we went back to the general research about Spooner's Row and looked at the types of commercial establishments that were nearby and if any of the artifacts matched up. But it was generally along that main street. We found a mixture of fill materials and disturbed context from pretty much that mid-19th century all the way up to, I think, within a few years ago. Like we'd even find like bracelets and things from events happening in the park from like 4 years earlier. So it was really concentrated along that main street areas where most of the interesting older historic contexts were. Thank you. Was that okay? Sure. Okay, maybe more than you needed, but okay. All right, well, yes.
Do you know, are Minneapolis parks planning any additional interpretive signage for the park based on the new finds or any advance to their public engagement?
I would love to see more public engagement. We are usually in dialogue with the city of Minneapolis and their park board specifically about potentials for these things. I don't know of any at the moment. Could probably go talk to my boss, Jeremy Nienow, who's out at the table, if there's anything in the works in terms of public engagement. Otherwise, presentations like this and talking about some of the remarkable collections that we've had, I hope, is one of the outcomes that at least that are in our sphere of control that we can do to talk about these fun things. Because I think a lot of these little midden discoveries like we have here don't get talked about, don't get known if we don't have a presentation like this. So thank you for the question. Yes.
For the other buildings, you think they're related artifacts being scattered or clustered, congregations just cleaned out when they made the park, or do you think they just didn't have as much related tribes?
Okay, fair to ask. I think this midden in particular was protected by the tree. A lot of the demolition and subsequent building over of the park impacted a lot of it, besides the substantial limestone foundation set in the ground almost on bedrock. A lot of everything else in between was either impacted or mixed with other contexts and fill from later periods. So it was a lot harder to determine. Laura, would that be your opinion there on that? Because you looked at more of the features than I did. I was the alternate, right? Thank you, Laura. Okay, so I'm making sure my boss there agrees on that particular part. Okay. Sub boss, I don't know, what's our role in the company? We're like co-equals, but that was your project. So anyway, thank you for the question. But was there any other hands? Otherwise, I'll let the next presenter warm up here if we have a minute or two.
There's no other questions. Thank you for sharing. all that
Yeah,
information
thank you
on-
all for listening and I appreciate your questions. Thank you.